Hey everyone, it's Nathan with Crown and Caliber, and today we are talking about absurd watches.
Again!
Ding, ding, ding. Yes, so we recently did a video where we talked about 7 of the most absurd watches money can buy, and you guys loved it. You had great comments, you had questions and suggestions on watches that we did not have. And guys, of course, there were more than 7 watches worthy of being on that list. Jonathan and I had gone through numerous watches that could have been on that list, and so we decided to go ahead and give you 7 more of the most absurd watches that money can buy, part 2. Insane edition. So before we jump into our 7 more of the most absurd watches, we think it's worth mentioning how we determined what an absurd watch was. And really, price wasn't the factor. If price were the factor, we'd have gone and picked out some crazy Philippe Dufour that's selling for millions of dollars, or some Grand Comp from Patek. Ultimately for us, defining absurdity is a little difficult. We definitely know how to count it, but it's one of those things that you kind of just know it when you see it. And all of these watches absolutely check that box. So up first in our list is a watch from Harry Winston. Now you guys in the comments below asked why we didn't include Harry Winston on the first list, and you guys are absolutely right. A watch from them definitely needs to be on there, and the one we picked is none other than the Harry Winston Opus 11. Now, a quick history. Harry Winston is a company that was founded in the 1930s. They are a luxury company, most notably known for their diamonds, but of course they also make timepieces. They are currently owned by the Swatch Group, so they are siblings with brands, of course, like Omega, but we are focusing on the Harry Winston Opus 11. Now, the Opus is a line of watches that Harry Winston started in the early 2000s, and it was basically an opportunity for Harry Winston to partner with a famous watchmaker to make some pretty absurd watches. And the Opus 11 does not disappoint. Now, they are currently on the Opus 14, but we are focusing on the Opus 11 from 2011 because of just how absurd it is. Now, the Opus series, as I mentioned, is Harry Winston partnering with a famous watchmaker. And for those of you that know the famous watchmakers, we're gonna put you in the class of just dorks. Ultimately, this watch was designed by a gentleman named Denis Jaguet. I'm sure I mispronounced that, but he was the gentleman that designed the Opus 11, and when you see this watch, you're gonna say it's absurd. This watch is made up of 566 parts. That already is a lot of parts. And it has 155 jewels. That is more jewels than a standard movement has parts. That's absurd. And it's really down to how this watch displays the time. So the main dial is going to display the hours, and it is represented by 24 unique placards that basically rotate and flip and create the numbers and the display of the time. It's absurd. In the top left corner, you'll get the minutes, and that's represented by 2 jumping discs. And then in the bottom right corner, in its separate own orb, is the escapement. This is the Opus 11. I struggle to say anything other than the word absurd when you think about this. In 2011, this watch cost approximately $230,000. But don't worry, it definitely had its Harry Winston touch because you could get this thing decked out with diamonds. You know, I think it's safe to say that this would be Harry Winston's magnum opus. So there you go, guys, the Harry Winston Opus 11. So up next in our list of the most absurd watches is going to be from the brand Jacob & Co. And plenty of you asked why we didn't include a Jacob & Co. in our first list of absurd watches. And honestly, they are probably the easiest to pick from. Plenty of you were like, why didn't you pick something from the Astronomia line, whether it was the Sky or the Solar? And my reply would be, well, that's just scratching the surface. I mean, Jacob & Co. makes watches like the Twin Turbo Furious and my personal favorite, the Oil Pump. And no, these are not new Vin Diesel movies. These are actual watch names from Jacob & Co. But we want to focus on the Bugatti Chiron Tourbillon Sapphire Crystal. And the reason we want to focus on this one is, I mean, the name alone it sparks interest, but is because this watch in its current iteration came out in December, and it is absurd. Let's just start with some of the high-level details. This is a 44mm by 54mm sapphire case cut from a single block of sapphire. Now, what's inside of this watch, other than a movement and a tourbillon, is an actual replica of the Bugatti Chiron's W16 engine. Yeah, at 6 o'clock, there is a tiny model of the W16 engine. All 16 cylinders, 2 turbochargers. It even looks like it has exhausts coming out from the main plate. And when you press one of the crowns, the engine fires. That means that all of those cylinders are firing in succession thanks to a tiny crankshaft that is spinning. The twin turbos are spinning. I mean, this watch is absurd. That engine block is also cut from sapphire, so you get to see all of these moving parts. And then you almost forget that this watch is a tourbillon. That's sitting at 12 o'clock is a 30-degree tourbillon, which is a first for Jacob & Co. And the tourbillon itself has the Jacob & Co. logo. Other notable features are the fact that the entire movement is suspended in the case thanks to 4 automotive-inspired springs. The power reserve at 7 o'clock looks like an empty full fuel gauge, which is just whimsical and silly. It is just absurd. And I think to wrap it all up is this 578 part watch that has literally a replica of the W16 engine from the Chiron only has 2 turbochargers. And the actual Chiron has 4 turbochargers. And my question to Jacob & Co. is, if you're going to go to the great lengths to make this watch, why only include 2 of the 4? I mean, it's like he knew we wanted to make a video about this watch and say how absurd it is. So really the only question left to ask yourself at a price tag of north of $1.2 million is whether or not you would like to wear your Bugatti or drive yours. So there you go, guys. The Jacob & Co. Bugatti Chiron Tourbillon Sapphire Crystal. So up next in our list of absurd watches happens to be our most reasonable watch, if only in price point, and that is going to be from the brand Devon. Now, Devon is a brand that was founded really recently by a gentleman named Scott Devon, and their first watch came out in 2010 and was called the Tread 1. But today we're going to be looking at their second watch, known as the Tread 2. Yes, you guessed it. Now, this is effectively a quartz watch. But not just any quartz watch. This is a thermocompensated quartz watch that is powered by a rechargeable lithium-ion battery, regulated by a microprocessor, and displaying time thanks to Kevlar-reinforced nylon belts rotating around on non-lubricated ruby rollers. Yeah, that's absurd. And it takes one look at this watch to realize that this thing is crazy. So as I said, the time is displayed thanks to these Kevlar reinforced nylon belts, which happen to be less than 1 millimeter thick. They come straight from the aircraft industry, and they rotate around, as I said, non-lubricated sealed ruby bearing rollers that allow them to display the time. Thanks to a microprocessor and the use of optical sensors, this watch is always going to represent the accurate time and is said to be accurate to within half a second a day. Now, if that wasn't enough, I should also mention that this is a chronograph. Not just any chronograph, this is a mono pusher chronograph. So all in all, what you're looking at is a 41.5 millimeter case with a bunch of crazy belts spinning around inside, allowing you to see the time as an absurd way. So there you go, guys. Coming in at just over $12,000 is the Devon Tread 2. All right, so next up in our list of absurd watches is from the brand Debutune. Now, this is a very small Swiss manufacturer. They make on average 150 watches a year, and they definitely represent high horology. Now, there are some really absurd watches from Debutune, things like watches that are actually made from a meteor, like the case is from Meteor, but we are going to instead focus on the bread and butter of Debutune, and that is the DB28. This watch has many different iterations from the brand, and today we're going to be focusing on specifically the DB28 Ti S5 C3PN. And while that may also be an obscure robot from Star Wars, it happens to also be the Debutune model that we are going to be looking at. We picked this one in particular because it has so many of the stalwarts that make the DB28 an icon from the brand. It starts off with the spring-loaded lugs. Yes, the watch basically has lugs that do this. So it can hug the wrist even though it is a much larger wrist watch. The crown is located at 12 o'clock, happens to actually be a screw-down crown. This is a manual wound watch with a twin barrel and 6-day power reserve. Yeah. That's pretty crazy. Now, when you look at this watch, it is absurd. Smack dab in the center of that dial is a mirror polished delta shape that looks like this watch came straight from Star Trek, even though we already told you it is a droid from Star Wars. And then smack dab there in the center below that is a tourbillon. So this watch is not only packing the punch with 6-day power reserve, it also has a tourbillon. And then below that is one of the more iconic elements from a Debutune, and that is the moon phase. It is an actual spherical ball in there. Half of it is white palladium, the other half is blued steel, and it does rotate. Like I said, this is an absurd watch. And all of this technology can be had for approximately $91,000, so you don't even have to break the six-figure budget. So there you guys go. From Debutune, the DB28 Ti S5 C3 PN. Boop, beep, boop. So up next in our list of the most absurd watches is from the brand Christophe Claret, and that is going to be none other than the Extreme One. And granted, their naming of this watch seems like something like a 90s Huffy bicycle, it does serve a purpose. The Extreme One actually stands for the Experimental Time Research Engineering Mechanism. You can describe that as none other than absurd, but this watch truly is absurd.
What about extreme?
Extreme. Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. This watch is extremely absurd. Thank you, Christophe. But what really makes this watch absurd is the fact that it has magnets. If you know anything about mechanical watches, then you know that magnets are absolutely the bane of performance. That's why watches try to be anti-magnetic, but the use of the magnets in the Extreme One is very unique. It is to hold hollow stainless steel balls in suspension inside of tubes that represent the timekeeping. Yeah, I can't make that kind of stuff up. And if you look at the watch, the main focal point of the watch, the center of the watch, is the going train. It has skeletonized barrels, it has a floating tourbillon with a 30-degree tilt at 6 o'clock, and then of course, flanked on either side are these tubes with the hollow stainless steel balls representing the time. The stainless steel balls are able to move back and forth in these tubes almost invisibly thanks to the carriage of specialty magnets, one on the 3 o'clock side and one on the 9 o'clock side. And these specialty magnets hold that ball in suspension. And these magnets then move up and down along the case thanks to surgical grade silk. As if we had to throw in one more crazy material that Christophe Claret uses. This watch is a mixture of PVD-coated grade 5 titanium and red gold. It is just absurd. It has a twin barrel mechanism, one for powering the going train and the other for powering the time functionality, and it is made up of 420 parts, two of which of course are those hollow stainless steel balls that represent timekeeping. And not to be outdone, the Christophe Claret Extreme One does have superluminova on the two outside tubes, so even in the dead of night, you can look at the balls and know what time it is. And this crazy, absurd, extreme technology is all housed in roughly a 40mm case. So this watch is somewhat wearable. What's not wearable is the $290,000 price tag. And that, my friends, is the Christophe Claret Extreme One. All right, up next and second to last in our list of the most absurd watches is from Richard Mille. Now this is the only brand that makes it on our list twice, and this may be somewhat controversial, but this watch had to be on here. And more importantly, this watch was not released when we filmed our first video, so that is ultimately why it's on here. This is the RM2704, and this watch happens to be the watch that is on the wrist of Rafael Nadal.
Who's he?
He's a famous tennis player. Now this is the 5th watch in the series and represents the 10th anniversary of the partnership between Rafael Nadal and Richard Mille. And this watch truly takes it to a new absurdity. This is a manual wound tourbillon, and like a lot of the Richard Mille watches, this watch is extremely lightweight. Now, albeit it is not as light as the original RM027, but the RM2704, the one we are talking about, can withstand up to 12,000 Gs of force. So it's safe to say that this one is a step in the right direction. The ethos of the RM2704 continues what Richard Mille and Nadal have worked on, which is he is able to play tennis while wearing this watch. This watch is now made of a new material, which is Titacarb. Richard Mille claims that this is made with at least 38.5% carbon fiber, which I'm guessing that 0.5% is what allows Nadal to win those matches. But on top of that, where things get really crazy is when you look at the movement. The entire movement is suspended in a stainless steel mesh lattice work, which can only be described as a tennis racket. It is held in place thanks to grade 5 titanium hooks that have been polished and then PVD treated with gold. And that's what you have. You basically have a movement that looks like it's sitting on a spider web of steel wires that Nadal can swing his arm as fast as he possibly could, and it's still going to keep on ticking. And on top of all of this, if you want this watch, it's one of only 50 pieces and retails for a cool $1,050,000. Yeah, we broke the $1 million mark with this one, and that, my friends, is the Richard Mille RM2704 manual wound tourbillon for Rafael Nadal. All right, so rounding out our picks of 7 more of the most absurd watches money can buy is from the brand Greubel Forsey. And while this may not be the most expensive watch on the list, this one definitely takes the cake, in my opinion, in complexity. Today we're going to be looking at the Greubel Forsey GMT Quadruple Tourbillon. And boy, do we have a lot to unpack here. So we're going to start off by kind of giving a refresher in what a tourbillon is. So a tourbillon is a mechanism that takes the heartbeat of the watch, the escapement, the balance wheel, and the hairspring, and has that in a continual motion. What it ultimately does is it prevents the gravitational forces from affecting the general timekeeping of a watch. Now, when Mr. Breguet invented this complication, it was best suited in a stationary clock like a grandfather clock. And there is definitely some speculation that a tourbillon, from a performance standpoint, has no purpose in a wristwatch because on a wrist, the watch is constantly moving and thus the movement of the tourbillon is somewhat negated. But Greubel Forsey set out to fix this, and they came up with something they like to call the double tourbillon. And what this is you have a cage that rotates once every 4 minutes. Then inside of that cage is another cage set at a 30-degree angle that rotates every 60 seconds. Inside that second cage, at the 30-degree angle, is housed the escapement, the hairspring, and the balance wheel. Now, both of those tourbillons acting in tandem is what creates more of an averaged out timekeeping. That's impressive. I mean, that is like super stinking impressive, especially since Greubel Forsey is only a 15-year-old brand. That's some serious technology. But what if you added a second one? And that's what brings us to the quadruple tourbillon. This watch that we're looking at has 2 of those. So now you have 2 double tourbillons that work together, and how do you join them? How about a spherical differential in the middle that then blends and averages all 4 of the timekeeping abilities of those tourbillons into one? And I haven't said it yet, but guys, that's pretty absurd. I don't know if we can accurately know if this keeps time better. At 805 parts, it is highly complex, and in a real world situation, may not, but you gotta give props to Greubel Forsey for making something that is truly exquisite, and we're just gonna go ahead and say it. Absurd, but it doesn't stop there because this isn't just a quadruple tourbillon, this is a GMT. And now that we've covered the quadruple tourbillons in the GMT quadruple tourbillon, let's focus on some of the main features on the watch. Of course, the timekeeping is located in a subdial right around 2 o'clock, and that also features the power reserve, which is 72 hours, thanks to the twin barrels in this timepiece. And then nestled right around 4 o'clock is an additional subdial that does have the GMT time. If we go ahead and flip the watch over, we can see that there is a world timer disc that allows you to see all major cities, and they are separated into black and white depending on whether or not they observe daylight savings. If we go ahead and flip the watch back over, we get to probably one of the most unique features on this watch, which is saying a lot because this does have 4 tourbillons. And that is the 24-hour universal time and the entire spherical globe located at 7 o'clock. And this really digs into just the level of detail that Greubel Forsey puts into their timepieces. So the spherical globe we're looking at is though we are looking at it from the North Pole. You can also view it from the case middle thanks to a sapphire window that allows you to view the equator, and of course from the back where you could view the southern hemisphere. But I digress. If we're looking at it from the main dial, we are looking at the globe. And as a quick aside, we're gonna have a brief lesson on Earth, the planet in which we reside, last time I checked. And this helps give some context to how much detail Greubel Forsey puts into the timepiece. So the Earth is around 8,000 miles in diameter. And at the scale in which we are viewing Earth in the Greubel Forsey timepiece, we are viewing it from around 95,000 miles away. And what's interesting about this is right around the threshold of the familiar and the abstract. That's right around where we can still view it and say, hey, that is our home, but much further away, it just starts to look like a marble in the expanse. And that level of thought and psychology that is put into a timepiece, and albeit what isn't even the main factor of the watch, is just absurd. We have a watch that you then look at and it has this playful element and you can relate to it, but at the same point, you're viewing it and it's this just expansive timepiece with dials and globes and numbers, and it is just exquisite. But to bring us back down to earth, it's worth noting that nothing on this watch wasn't thought about. The main plate and bridges are made of frosted German silver. Truly, nothing was without thought when it came to this watch. And if you would like to own your own Greubel Forsey GMT Quad Tourbillon, then all you need is a cool $820,000. And that, my friends, is going to round out our list of 7 more of the most absurd watches money can buy. We hope you enjoyed our list. We hope we included some of the ones that you guys asked about, and we'd love to hear in the comments below some of the watches that we may have missed. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.